diversity. Come on down, everybody, right up into the plots here. So, I'm Eric Olson. I'm a wheat breeder and geneticist at Michigan State, and I'm very glad you're all here today at our Scab Nursery. What you see, come on down up in front of me here. I'd like you guys to have a look at this. On your right, you'll see a resistant variety. Right, this is just a genetic resistance. These are no fungicides, just pure genetic resistance. And on the left, you will see a susceptible variety. And I've got some other examples up here too. If you guys want to, and feel free if you want to have a look around in the nursery. We've got the lanes mowed for you, and you'll be in a lot of different spaces. You can see the level of genetic resistance here. So these the best possible control for Fusarium head blight in wheat is genetic resistance right here. Every single company, university breeding wheat in the United States is selecting for resistance to this disease to keep mycotoxins out of our food supply, right? So we've got a 2 ppm minimum for Don and 1 ppm for food, right? Or if it's going to be sold internationally. So the ways that we can control scab, mitigate any kind of risk for this pathogen is first, select a resistant variety, genetic resistance. So you can see that on the resistant varieties here, this pathogen, it's infected only one spikelet or only one floret, right? So this pathogen infects during flowering, right? So that's why we apply the second part of the package, your fungicide, applied at the appropriate time, genetic resistance. So if we have a resistant variety and you apply that T3 fungicide at the appropriate time, whether it's a Miravis product or you're looking at Fusarium, I don't know if Carumba's in the marketplace anymore, but that combination is the best control for scab, okay? Now, and what you'll see on the left is the consequences of not spraying that wheat at the appropriate time, right? So that pathogen in these susceptible varieties, that pathogen has moved in, it's infected, and then it's moved through the vasculature in that spike, right? And along the way, it's producing mycotoxins and infecting the developing grain, right? And so in these resistant varieties, right, it's been halted. So you can see, if you look at these resistant varieties, you can see where there's a little bit of necrosis, right? The brown areas, and you'll even see the little salmon-colored conidia, right? It'll start to sporulate. Those are some conidia that are sporulate. Sporodokia, that's the term for it. I'm brushing up on my mycology here. But you can see those salmony structures. That shows that has been infected with Fusarium, and that fungus hasn't moved at all. So that's the best possible way to control scab is with genetic resistance when you apply a fungicide at the appropriate time. So we do this every year where all of the commercial wheat varieties that are available on your farms in Michigan, they go through the gauntlet here in this nursery. So what we see in front of us here is about 1,300 different varieties of wheat, right? 800 of which are from the MSU breeding program. So none of our varieties none of those genotypes ever make it into the field if they're susceptible for scab. So I was out here just yesterday. It was about a 9-hour march through here, and we take a note on those, and so we essentially cull out of the breeding program. Nothing makes it past this nursery that is susceptible. So we're moving forward with resistance in all of our variety development activities, and we're carefully evaluating. So Amanda Noble, technician in the program, took the notes just yesterday on the variety trial. So you can see the results in Michigan Farm News, right? That's going to come out about the first week of August. It's going to be in print, and it's going to be online as well. So I encourage you to, in your variety selection, to carefully select based on the level of severity. Now in your handouts here, this is going to give you some background on how to use the information in those handouts for variety selection. Now we're looking at different mechanisms of resistance, right? Now what the fungicide is doing is preventing that initial infection into the wheat spike, right? So you can spray a susceptible variety sometimes, and that's why you see a few heads that are not all infected, right? So not every head is always infected, but what it does, that fungicide is preventing that initial infection, from preventing that spore from germinating on the surface of that spike and getting in through the flower. Now having a resistant variety, it essentially stops. That fungus might be able to infect, right? It might be able to get in there and infect, but it doesn't go anywhere, right? The only necrosis, the only dead tissue that we see is that one site of infection, right? So the genetic resistance has halted the development of that pathogen, right? It's going no further, right? Gandalf, you shall not pass, right? So that is the benefit of having resistance with the fungicide, is that the fungicide is preventing that initial infection, and if there are any breakthrough infections, then that's where the genetic resistance comes in to back it up, right? So ultimately, if you apply this under just the natural conditions in the field, right, that should keep you below that 2 ppm. Unless, I mean, granted, there are extreme events. I think 2015 was pretty extreme, if anyone was growing wheat 10 years ago. 2019 was a less severe event, 2015. And then if you go all the way back to 1996, you can see the yield charts across the eastern U.S. It was in the spring wheat region too, and in Ontario, right? The yield trends, it dropped a bit, right? And then came back up after that. That was scab, right? That was Fusarium. That's why we're here working on all of this, right? So, all right, I'm going to pause there and kind of open up the floor for any questions or comments that you might have about what you're seeing here or in general here. You can see other diseases too. There's scab, but then we've got some bacterial leaf streak out here. Probably going to find some leaf rust. You've got cereal leaf beetle damage, so I'm going to open up the floor for any comments or questions from you all at this point. All right. Well, so there has been, not necessarily, it's not necessarily a part of the resistance, right? It has been speculated that the awns are going to be capturing spores that are airborne, right? And potentially, that's not necessarily true. This the awn variety it's got really good resistance actually. Where we have seen I'm gonna pivot and talk about a different disease. It's not technically a disease. I know we're here to talk about FHB, but I also want to bring up falling number because we are very close to harvest today at the Mason Nursery. That's grain yield, Fusarium head blight, falling number, the top 3 traits that we work on. And today is the first day of physiological maturity at the Mason farm. So we've got a small army out there sampling spikes at physiological maturity. We're going to evaluate them for falling number later. Now, we actually found last year that having awns, the awn varieties on average had a lower falling number, right? Potentially from water absorption, right? They act as antennae, grab those water droplets and wick them down to the spikes, right? And potentially saturating that mature seed with water, right? So what we're now looking for are differences in how these varieties imbibe water, right? So it may not necessarily affect FHB, but it is a factor in falling number, right? And so that's part of my, I want to make this recommendation that you plant multiple varieties for that reason, right? Not all varieties are created equal, right? They all have their strengths, right? Good yield potential, right? But they could be vulnerable to some diseases, right? So you need to spread your risk across multiple varieties, right? Multiple maturities. Some of these varieties will flower at different times. 5 minutes. 5 more minutes, okay. So they're going to flower at different times, right? And that's going to affect when you should be in the field applying that fungicide, right, to control head scab. So planting multiple varieties allows you to spread your risk because if the wheat is at a different physiological stage, right, it's going to experience those environmental conditions differently, right? So that earlier variety, you may have a rain event that prevents you from applying that fungicide at the right time, but your later maturity variety that is yet headed 3 days later is experiencing a very different environment, right? It's unaffected by that weather event. So you're able to spread your risk on your acres by spreading multiple varieties, planting multiple varieties out there. So that's always a good policy. It can affect your workload, affect your risk for these diseases, right? You could have stripe rust was an issue last year, not so much this year, but the potential, the risk for these diseases is present every single year. That's why we have a scab nursery out here every year. We don't forget about it. Yeah, even if I'm glad you're not concerned about it, right? That's a good thing if you're not worried about it. But we're out here working on it every single year, so you don't have to worry about it, right? So that you have those. And if you're an agronomist working with growers, please make that a consideration in the varieties that you recommend. And if this is a major issue, we most likely will not see major scab issues in Michigan this year. I know Southern Illinois, right? There's some major soft wheat. We're a soft wheat producer here. 95% of the wheat that's produced in Michigan gets milled within 100 miles of here, right? Very close. So there's the Toledo market, and then there's, of course, we have 2 of the largest flour mills in the United States are right here in Michigan, right? And so it's important to maintain a continuity in that value chain, right? So that grain can move all the way from your field all the way to an elevator, to a mill, and all the way to Kellogg's or Nabisco, wherever those products are going to end up. So we're producing food here, folks. I mean, so it's important that having that high quality wheat, and the higher the quality of the wheat, easier it is for it to move from your farm into the value chain, right? And so things that can slow it down, Don, right? Mycotoxin, that can slow it down. But it's easy to dilute mycotoxins. You can dilute it out 1-to-1, right? You mix 1 with 2, you get 1.5, right? So, or 0 and 1, you get 0.5. So it's very straightforward. Falling number, I'm going to work falling number in here too, just because we're close to harvest in a couple weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks from now. Falling number, the enzyme situation doesn't work the same way. It's not 1-to-1. It just takes a little bit of enzyme to spoil a whole batch, right? So that's why it's very important to focus on getting that wheat out of the field as soon as possible, right? So if you have 16% wheat and there's a storm coming, please cut that wheat. It will sit, right? There is enough feed wheat in North Carolina and Georgia right now. We do not need your grain entering the feed market, right? So it is more profitable to cut that wheat early, absorb a minor drying cost. It's going to be minor relative to the falling number issues.
Eric, how heritable is falling number? And then how many varieties will actually make it out of this research facility here and move on?
Right, okay, so there is relatively high heritability for falling number. And so what we're doing now is we're sampling all the commercial varieties in the variety trial. We're misting them for 2 days, essentially simulating rainfall conditions for 2 days. And there is some separation. It is moderately heritable. Higher than grain yield, but less than scab. FHB resistance is highly, highly heritable. Every single replicate for every variety has nearly the same phenotype across the trial. Now, in terms of varieties that are making it out of our program, out of those 800, there's only 250 that we're gonna select in advance, and then only 200 of those are gonna move on from there based on 1,000 kernel weight. Essentially, we're gonna make another strong cut on that, which is another highly heritable trait, definitely. So there's a strong genetic component to these traits, and that's why genetic resistance works. Yeah, and that's why genetic tolerance to low falling number also works. All right, any other wrap-up questions, comments? All right, I want to thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate the support. Support for all of this work's coming from the U.S. Wheat and Barley Scab Initiative. So this is funding from Congress that has allowed us to make gains on this over the last 30 years. That's why we don't worry about scab as much. It's not as we did in 1997. So very good to see you all. Thank you all for the support, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.